It began in silence. Not the kind that soothes, but the kind that leaves you hollow, the kind that settles in old places long forgotten by man and mercy alike. A gust of wind swept across the edge of the bayou country, curling over rusted barbed wire, nudging brittle cattails that hadn't felt rain in weeks. And at the edge of a sunken field, half swallowed by a patch of thorny vines and scorched grass, a shadow moved. It was barely a shape. Coated in thick blackness, the young elephant was almost unrecognizable, a sculpture of grief and sludge. His small frame sagged, his front legs folded as if he'd surrendered mid-stride. Oil clung to his skin like tar, thick and unmoving, clogging the folds around his joints, his eyes sealed in darkness. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe loud enough to stir the dust. He just lay there, ribs faint beneath the filth, as if waiting to become part of the land. He had wandered from something, or perhaps been cast off. No mother nearby, no herd, no prints leading in or out of the field. Only the marks of his own body where he'd dragged himself as far as the border of an abandoned oil pit, now dried at the edges, but still slick and deadly at the center. It reeked of neglect, of something that should have been buried decades ago. But the pit had stayed, like a scar the land couldn't scrub clean, and so had the elephant, and he was ready to let go. A single crow landed near his ear, bold and curious, but even it tilted its head in confusion. There was no fight, no flick of a trunk, no instinct to rise, just silence, the kind of silence that follows a soul's last whisper. And then, far off, the crunch of old boots. Through a trail nearly swallowed by honeysuckle and rust, a man moved slowly. Caleb Morrow, 64, with silver stubble and a shirt 2 sizes too big. He wore the same green cap he had worn every day since his wife passed 6 summers ago. It was stained and sun-bleached, pulled low as if it could keep out the memory of her laughter echoing in their now empty house. Caleb wasn't supposed to be here. He hadn't walked this far past the fence line in years. The land past the cypress grove belonged to no one now, or so people said. Once a rancher, then a mechanic, now just a man living in the house he and Lorna built with their bare hands. He rarely wandered beyond the old pasture anymore, but something had called him. Not a voice, not a vision, just an unease. He'd seen the buzzards circling, slow and low, and his chest had tightened in that old, unexplainable way. So he followed them, and when he stepped into the field, he stopped. There, barely 15 feet away, was a mass he almost mistook for rock. But then the wind shifted, and he saw the shape of a collapsed ear, and a glint of something slick reflecting the light. He didn't move. For a long time, man and animal just existed, both still, both tired of being seen by the world. And then Caleb did something small. He removed his cap, not out of habit, but out of respect. Something about the way the elephant lay there, as if he'd folded his story into the mud and was asking no one to read it, made Caleb feel like an intruder. So he knelt, slowly, his knees pressing into the cracked earth, and placed the cap over his heart. The elephant didn't stir, but the wind picked up, and the smell, sharp, chemical, wrong, caught at the back of Caleb's throat. He coughed once, then noticed the stains trailing from the pit to the calf's side. Oil, thick as death. Someone had left this land to rot, and it had taken something with it. His fingers curled against his jeans. He'd seen broken engines, crushed hands, mangled tractors, but never anything like this. The oil had coated the calf's entire body, sealing its eyes shut, poisoning every breath. But something was still beating inside that chest, and Caleb knew that because he could feel his own heart aching in rhythm with it. He stood slowly, walked forward, 1 step, 2, close enough to hear a breath, ragged, shallow. He didn't speak. He didn't try to touch. He just sat, cross-legged beside the calf, and waited. He didn't know what he was waiting for. A sign, a sound, a choice. And far above them, the sky remained pale and merciless. If your heart moved reading this first moment, follow our channel. It helps this kind of story reach more souls. And if you believe silent kindness still matters, stay with us. The story is just beginning. The next morning, Caleb was still there. He hadn't planned to stay. But something about the way the calf had not moved, and yet had not died, held him in place. The land was quiet, as if the bayou itself was holding its breath. No birdsong, no wind, just the hum of insects and the heavy stillness of something sacred unfolding, slow as sap. Caleb's hands were cracked from years of wrenching bolts and dragging chains, but they had never touched anything as delicate as a dying creature's hope. He hadn't slept. Just sat there, through the coolness of night and into the syrupy light of dawn, watching for a twitch, a breath, a blink. It came just after the sun stretched over the pines. One slow exhale. The elephant's back shifted, barely, but enough to crack the dried oil clinging to his ribs. Caleb blinked back tears he didn't understand. He felt it. Not relief, not even joy, just responsibility. He rose with a grunt and walked the half-mile back home. Each step felt like he was leaving a church service halfway through the prayer. Inside his shed, he grabbed the old water pump, a rusted bucket, a worn tarp, and 2 jugs of vinegar. He didn't know what else to bring. The books he had once read with Lorna on animal rescue were long gone, but his hands remembered things, old things, the way grease slid from engine parts with enough vinegar and heat, the way oil softened with touch and time. By the time he returned, the sun was high, and the calf hadn't moved, but his ear twitched when Caleb knelt down again. That was enough. Caleb unfolded the tarp beside the pit, placed the bucket next to it, and poured in water. It was tepid, shallow, but clean. He added a splash of vinegar, stirred it with his fingers, then paused. This would hurt. The calf didn't know he was helping, wouldn't understand the sting, the scraping, the cold water. But if he waited for permission, it would be too late. So he began. He dipped a cloth into the mix and slowly touched the calf's flank. Nothing. Then a flick, not to resist, more like a reflex. Caleb exhaled. He continued, 1 square inch at a time, scrubbing gently, rinsing, repeating. The oil clung to every crease like a second skin. It wasn't just on the surface. It was inside the folds of the ears, between the toes, along the ridges of the spine. He worked until his own skin was raw, and still, the elephant didn't move, but he breathed. That night, Caleb dragged the tarp closer to the calf and lay beside him, not to sleep, just to share space. He told himself it was in case coyotes came, but deep down, he knew the truth. He just didn't want the calf to die alone. On the 3rd day, something changed. Caleb returned from filling the jugs at the river bend, and the elephant had turned his head slightly, not toward him, toward the sound. It was small, almost imperceptible, but Caleb froze, then sat down slowly and began to speak, even though he knew the calf couldn't understand words. "It's all right," he said gently. "You're not in the dark anymore." Then he dipped the cloth again. This time, as it touched the calf's side, he felt a tremor, not of pain but of recognition. So he scrubbed again, and again, and again. By the end of the 4th day, one eye was clean, just one, but it opened, clouded, dim, but open. It blinked once, twice, then held his gaze. Caleb didn't move. He simply placed his palm flat on the ground between them, not touching, just offering. And after a long pause, the calf's trunk shifted, wavered, then, in a slow, searching arc, brushed against Caleb's open hand. A shiver went through the old man's chest. Not from cold, but from memory. He hadn't held a hand since Lorna. He hadn't been chosen since. But here, in the mud and filth and silence, something sacred passed between them. No words, no tears, just breath and contact. If you're still here, maybe your heart was meant to witness this moment. Stay with us. The quiet miracle is just beginning to unfold. Caleb didn't mark the days after that. Time stopped being a clock and started being something softer, measured in breaths, gestures, the slow peel of blackness from skin. The world shrank to the space between one man's hands and one elephant's wounds. Every morning, he returned with new water, warmer now. He'd begun heating it in an old kettle, rusted but faithful. He carried it in a blue thermos with a chipped handle, the same thermos Lorna had used on long road trips. It smelled faintly of mint and old stories. The elephant waited for him now. He didn't move much, his legs still stiff, his belly still swollen and sore. But his eyes followed Caleb, and when the man knelt, the trunk would reach, tentatively, clumsily, toward the bucket, as if to help. Caleb began humming while he worked. Not songs with words, just low, droning notes, like lullabies forgotten by the world, but remembered by the body. The oil didn't come off easily. Some parts had hardened into crust. Others seeped into raw skin, making the calf wince when Caleb got too close. But he never rushed, never forced. He found a rhythm. Pour, wipe, rest. Pour, wipe, rest. Sometimes he'd stop and just sit, let the silence stretch like cotton between them. The kind of quiet you only shared with someone who's seen you bleeding. At night, Caleb brought blankets. He laid one beneath the calf's body, torn, faded flannel that had once belonged to his nephew. He knew it wouldn't warm the elephant, but it felt wrong for him to lie on cold dirt. Another he draped gently across the calf's back, more ritual than function. The stars came out in soft layers above the pines, and Caleb, wrapped in his coat and silence, watched the sky as if waiting for a sign. On the 6th day it rained, not the kind of rain that floods, just a steady drizzle, cold and cleansing. Caleb tried to shield the calf with a tarp, but the young elephant shifted, slowly, deliberately, and stood for the first time. His legs trembled like reeds, but he stood, for a few seconds, then collapsed again. But this time, he didn't collapse in fear. He collapsed into Caleb's lap, or as close as a calf could. His head, still damp and sticky, leaned into the man's knees. Caleb froze, then placed a trembling hand on the elephant's crown. No words, no patting, just presence. The rain softened the remaining oil, washed away the vinegar, mixed the mud into a balm, and as the clouds parted for a moment, a single beam of light touched them, just them, on that forgotten stretch of Louisiana soil. Later that night, Caleb brought a mirror from his cabin, a small one, the kind people hang in hallways to check their hair before church. He placed it on the ground and angled it toward the calf. The elephant didn't react at first. Then slowly his reflection came into view. Clean patches of skin, a single eye, visible, alert. He blinked at himself, then looked at Caleb, and trumpeted. It wasn't loud, it wasn't strong, but it was the first sound he had made. Caleb chuckled, a soft, broken thing, and nodded. "That's you," he whispered, even though they didn't speak the same language. "You're still here." That night, Caleb slept beside him fully, without boots, with one arm across the calf's neck. He dreamed of oil lamps, of steam rising from a wash basin, of a hand reaching through blackness and finding another hand in return, of forgiveness, not as a word, but as warmth. The next morning, the hawk returned. It circled once above the clearing, then landed near the far tree, watching. Not hunting, just witnessing. Caleb looked up, then at the calf, then at the sky, and for the first time in years, he smiled without pain in his chest. By the 10th day, most of the blackness was gone. What remained wasn't just skin, it was story. Pale gray patches where the oil had eaten through the first layers, small scars forming around the belly, a hairless spot on his flank that would never grow back. But the elephant no longer flinched when Caleb approached. He leaned in to touch, welcomed the warmth, sometimes even nudged the water bucket, as if saying, again. Caleb no longer brought tools, just hands, soft rags, warm water, and a rhythm that felt almost holy. He moved like someone tending an altar, and in a way, he was. Each motion was penance, and offering, and thank you. One morning the elephant found his reflection again. Caleb had left the mirror nearby, propped against a broken fence post. The calf stood alone in front of it. He didn't trumpet this time. He stared. He raised his trunk, touched the glass gently, then turned away, and walked toward the hill where the clearing ended. He paused halfway up, looked back, waited. Caleb stood barefoot at the bottom, not moving, letting the elephant choose. And after a moment, the calf returned, slow but steady, and pressed his forehead to Caleb's chest, not out of pain, not out of weakness, but out of choice. That night, the oil well lit up. A mechanical groan echoed from deep within the pipe, a fresh sputter. Somewhere underground, pressure had shifted. Caleb watched from the porch, a cigarette dead between his fingers, wondering if this was nature reclaiming its price. He thought about closing the valve, calling someone, but he didn't. Instead, he walked out with the calf and watched the machinery breathe. Two creatures who had both been caught in its teeth. Two survivors of someone else's greed. Caleb didn't talk much, not even to himself, but he began doing something he hadn't done in years. He wrote, scraps of paper at first, notes, times, descriptions of how the calf moved, when he ate, when he slept. Later he added sketches, crude lines but recognizable. The elephant lying in the mud, the elephant with one ear twitching at flies, the elephant raising his trunk like he'd seen the hawk again. Then, one evening, he added a name. Jasper. He didn't know why. It had belonged to a dog once, years ago. A good dog. A quiet one. The kind that sat beside your chair and didn't need to be told anything. Just knew. The name fit. So he used it. Jasper. The elephant that shouldn't have survived. Jasper. The one who didn't run when he healed. Who stayed. Jasper. The one who now stood at the porch edge every morning, waiting for Caleb to stretch his old back and come join him in the light. By the 4th week, Jasper had outgrown the clearing. He needed space. He needed movement. So Caleb walked him to the back of the property, through old cattle gates, over forgotten trails, to a stretch of pasture no one had touched in years. It had once been a grove. Hickory trees lined the slope. Soft moss covered the low places. There was a stream at the edge, shallow, clear, cold even in the heat. Jasper walked straight in, soaked his legs, then did something that made Caleb drop his mug. He splashed, playfully, like a child. He trumpeted once, louder this time, and turned in a slow circle. The sun caught him full on. No oil, no pain, just newness. That night, Caleb took the tarp from the shed and draped it across a low-hanging branch. He set up a fire pit, arranged 2 stumps, one for him, one for whoever he imagined might join them. And every evening after that, he sat there with his notebook, writing by firelight, while Jasper lay a few feet away, sometimes sleeping, sometimes watching the stars. And on the 39th day, a Thursday, something changed. Jasper didn't walk toward the porch that morning. He stood near the gate, trunk lowered, head bowed. Caleb approached slowly. The elephant raised his head. And behind him, standing just beyond the trees, was another elephant, older, female. Her ears were torn in places, but her eyes were whole. She didn't approach. She just stood, still as sculpture, waiting. Jasper looked between them, then back at Caleb. He didn't trumpet. He didn't cry. He just walked, slowly, reverently, toward her. And she, without fanfare, turned and began to walk away. Jasper followed. Caleb stood there long after they vanished into the trees, hands trembling, chest hollow, not from grief, but from something heavier, softer, like watching your child walk into the world on legs you helped steady. That night, he didn't build a fire. He didn't write. He just sat on the porch and placed a single peanut on the step, not as bait, as a goodbye. The days that followed were quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't just settle over a place. It seeps into it. Caleb woke without needing to. Poured coffee he didn't finish. Walked the property out of habit, but not out of need. Jasper was gone, but he'd left something behind. Not tracks. Those washed away on the 3rd day when the rain finally came. But something quieter, something truer. Like a breath you didn't know you'd been holding for years. Finally exhaled. Oh, the oil field was silent too. Whatever had stirred it that one night had gone still again. No more coughing metal. No more threats. Just rust and wind. Caleb thought about welding the valves shut, then thought better of it. Let them rot, he decided. Let nature erase it slowly, just like it was erasing the black scars on the soil, one grass blade at a time. One morning, Caleb found something tucked under the tarp he hadn't touched since Jasper left. It was a feather, small, curved, barred in black and bronze. He didn't recognize it at first, thought it was just debris. But when he lifted it, a breeze rolled through, and he swore he saw the shadow of a hawk circle overhead. Same one from that first day. Maybe, maybe not. Didn't matter. He tucked the feather into the spine of his notebook anyway. Some things aren't meant to be explained, only remembered. The notebook grew thicker. Caleb began writing more than just memories of Jasper. He wrote about the way the trees creaked when the sun went down, about the way his hands still smelled faintly of ash and soap, about the way he missed the weight of a trunk nudging his ribs at breakfast. He didn't call it grief. He called it remembering. Weeks passed. The cabin aged another season. The porch light flickered more often. The boards gave deeper sighs when he stepped on them. But something strange happened too. People started showing up, one by one. At first it was a woman from the Wildlife Rescue Office. Said she'd heard a strange report about an elephant sighting in the woods near St. Helena. Then came a teenager, camera in hand, searching for proof of a miracle rescue someone had posted about on a local blog. Then 2 volunteers from an elephant sanctuary in Tennessee. They all left quietly. None of them saw Jasper, but they all looked different when they drove away, like something in them had shifted, even if they couldn't name it. Caleb didn't give interviews, didn't answer questions, but he left the gate open. And sometimes he left notes under a rock by the fence post, scraps from his notebook, wrapped in wax paper. None were signed. All were true. Then one evening, months later, just before winter rolled in, something changed again. A sound, a feeling, like the air holding its breath. And in that moment, just before dusk, Caleb saw him. Not clearly, not fully, just a shadow, at the edge of the pasture. Large, graceful, older, and smaller shadows around him. 3, maybe 4. The shapes shifted in the low light, but there was no mistaking the slight lean of the ears, the rhythm of the steps. It was Jasper, and he had not come alone. They didn't approach. They didn't need to. They stood there watching, listening. Caleb stepped off the porch. His boots found the path without thinking. He didn't speak, didn't raise a hand, just looked and smiled, the kind of smile that hurts, because it's too full to stay inside. After a few minutes, the figures turned back into the woods. No trumpeting, no fanfare, just the slow, deliberate exit of creatures that now belonged to something bigger than any one man. That night, Caleb added one last line to the notebook. He came back to show me he remembered, not me, but what it means to be free. He folded the page, slipped it into the canvas pouch by the bed, blew out the candle, and slept without waking. Winter didn't come crashing in that year. It arrived the way grief does when it's done being sharp, slow, quiet, like a blanket pulled over your shoulders by hands you can't see. The leaves along the ridge turned late, stubborn golds and burnt oranges refusing to fall. And the cabin, once a fortress for a man who'd forgotten how to be touched by anything, now breathed like an open window. There was no more oil smell. The last of it had soaked into the roots or blown west with the dry wind. What remained was grass, short and trembling, but alive. And where Jasper had once lain, that crater in the land that held his weight, a ring of wildflowers began to bloom. They didn't belong there. Caleb knew every seed that had ever touched this soil. But these were strangers, bluebonnets, delicate, thin-necked, stubborn little things. He didn't plant them, didn't dare touch them, only watched, as if afraid that even breathing wrong might scare them back into the ground. And the porch was quieter too. No more heavy steps, no more sudden shadows stretching over the threshold. But there was something else. Every morning, just after dawn, Caleb would step outside with his chipped mug and hear it. A low rustle, a branch pushed aside, a breath in the underbrush. He never followed it, never chased the sound. Some part of him knew. Jasper wasn't gone. He was just elsewhere now. Somewhere he was meant to be. Somewhere that didn't need fences. The notebook stayed by the bed, untouched now, its pages full. He'd stopped writing, not because the story had ended, but because it had rooted itself in something deeper, in the skin, in the silence between tasks, in the way his hands, once calloused and clenched, now opened with ease, palms up, never fists. Sometimes, at night, the wind would pick up through the valley, and when it did, the tent flap, still tied down from the night of the rescue, would lift slightly, just for a moment, like it was exhaling. Caleb didn't tie it tighter. He liked the idea of the place breathing, of nothing being too fixed, too finished. Spring crept in again. With it came light rain and the sound of frogs under the boards. And one morning, just as the sun cracked over the trees, Caleb found something small beside the front step. Not a feather this time, not a note. It was a stone, smooth, flat, carved with the faintest line down the center, half black, half red. Nature didn't make stones like that, but life did. Life after fire, after pressure, after weight. He didn't ask how it got there. He didn't need to. Some gifts arrive without explanation and demand no acknowledgement. He placed it beside the gate, under the post, and left it alone. There were no more visitors. The blog post faded into rumor. The stories turned into something locals swapped over gas pumps and diner booths. But none came to see the place again, and that was okay. Some miracles are meant to stay hidden, to do their work in the dark. In the final week of spring, Caleb walked to the clearing one last time. The crater was still there, softer now, ringed with flowers. He knelt beside it, ran his fingers over the petals, then reached into his coat and pulled something out. The notebook, the canvas pouch. He didn't read it, didn't flip through the pages. He just pressed the whole thing gently into the soil, just where Jasper's trunk had once rested, and began to cover it with earth, one handful at a time, deliberate, like a ritual, a burial not of grief, but of remembering, of choosing what to let rest, so something else could rise. And when it was done, he stood. Let the wind take what it would. The flap lifted once more behind him, the sound of wings overhead, and far in the distance, just once, a trumpet, soft, carried by time, but unmistakable. Caleb smiled, not the smile of goodbye, but of knowing, of returning, because some bonds never break. They only learn how to stretch, how to echo across distance, and how to leave behind more than tracks.